Good morning, everybody. This is what me and my son was up to during the Sunday. Introducing Cup Boat number 2. And there it is. Still alive 1.5 days later. Wow. I do have to say that those cup boats are kind of impressing me in a way. How long they can actually be in the water without dissolving, you can say. That's a piece of paper, right? Paper cup. Impressive stuff. Yeah, it's getting quite dark now. Darker and darker, I would say. The lamps and so on down here in the valley is still turned on. That's the first for me, being down here and walking. I can see they're using some form of LED lights. Very good. And this guy is still here, walking around. Good, as it should be. Now for today's topic, I heard about on the radio when walking about Djokovic, which is a tennis player. I don't watch tennis very much, but I do know his name. Quite famous, of course. And that he was disqualified and fined for shooting in anger a tennis ball backwards and hitting a line referee in the throat. And that is apparently an action for disqualification, and apparently he also would be fined like 2.2 million Swedish kroner. So the topic that I was thinking of then was anger and anger management, which came very close to mind. I didn't see the event itself, but you know, when you do these things, it is often as a sign of irritation and anger. And people have different ways to express that and get it out of their system. And for a tennis player during a match, I've seen countless different examples of how they deal with that, with breaking rackets, throwing stuff far away, shooting balls up in the air here and there. It takes so many shapes and forms when it comes to tennis. But for the everyday person who is interacting with people or ending up in different situations, then it can take a little bit different forms. What I'm thinking about here is, of course, verbal abuse, fist fights, and the like. And you know the feeling when you get that. It's like your blood pressure is rising up. You can feel it thumping in your entire body. You get ready for an intensity of exchanging blows with somebody else. And it's not a bad feeling, I would say. But the situation it derives from is not so good, of course. We should not go so far in our daily lives that it results in fist fights. But it usually starts with the verbal abuse, however. Talking to other people in a demeanor manner. And that then escalates. And some people just have that tendency to seek out this kind of behavior as well. So people who wants to fight have an ability to seek out other people who wish to fight for the sake of, fighting. They really like that part, apparently. And that's the signs when you see people like supporters going to football games and so on, where they have some support groups that are very, I would say, not only doing it with their words, they're also doing it with their fists during or after or before the game even starts. Then the opposing team's support group, which shares the same idea to fight it out, would arrange like a meeting place to say, okay, here we go, this is where we're gonna duke it out. So meet up at this time and let's start. And it's I mean, as long as nobody comes in between, right? Or a car or whatever that gets demolished by these people, then I don't think there's a really big issue. Police can be on the scene and let them fight it out. But of course there's a cost to society in doing this regardless, right? If people then end up in hospitals where you would have to pay up from the taxpayers' money. Oh, here we have a dog running around. I wonder where the owner is. I don't know. Hey, what you doing? So the owner is over there. And she's buckling him up now. Right over there. That dog was just running wild around here. Where cars are coming now. Not a very good thing to do. You should never release your pet unless it's a sanctioned area. Then let's say a classic movie as well. So let's go into the movie world depicting these kinds of things. One movie that comes to mind is Fight Club, most famous for having, of course, Brad Pitt in a very muscular role. The sole purpose for that movie again was to fight. So guys who wants to get their aggravations out would seek each other out to a scene and then fight it out just for the sake of the rouse of fighting and getting hit and hitting somebody else. Of course, that movie isn't really about fighting as such, but about exploring the psyche of the main character and his kind of dual personality. But it becomes a really interesting thing once you realize that fact, and then you rewatch the movie to see how his two personalities are fighting over his existence, right? So, and you could actually argue then that that's how a person is, that it is two different personalities fighting between each other when they are in these situations. So, and there's a lot of talks about this even during the time when I was becoming a teacher, right? Back then it was more about that you had yourself as a person, but as soon as you stepped into the classroom to teach, then you were supposed to be the teacher. So a different person in many respects. Now, violence in general is often depicted as something that guys do, And while that is not at all true, and women are quite capable of doing violence themselves, it is a fact that the hormones and so on that is in a man's body lend themselves to a more aggressive behavior. You know, going all the way back to ancestors and so on, and protecting the tribe and the family and whatever nonsense you can fabricate or envision about why we have this. But yeah, from a species point of view, then a guy would always be the more muscular and more aggressive part of the species that would have different roles in a society. Like, for example, going to war and fighting against others would have normally been a guy doing that. But yeah, that's the gender part of it. Then we see things like sports. And sports have a little bit of a different thing, because you have women and men fighting in sports. I would say that arguably that the men's part of it has been more enlightened and sponsored compared to the women's side, but it does exist. Same like everything else. I myself have tried out some fighting sports as well. I wouldn't say on any form of professional or even amateur way, but just for exercise. I started out with some karate back when I was younger. That lasted for a little bit over a year, I would say, because then, as I mentioned, then I moved away from home, and the place I moved to didn't even have a karate dojo to train and practice in. So that basically died out straight there and then. The second time I tried out was boxing, again for a pure exercise perspective. But for this time around, then I ran out of time in my daily life to actually pursue and do it in a more in-depth manner. I mean, if I would start at something like this, I would go for it 100% basically. I'm paying for something to be doing something. So for me it wouldn't have been made any sense if I wouldn't go for that. And the time was just not there to do it in that manner, so I also stopped that, and that lasted a little bit less than a year, I would say. And from an anger management perspective, then I would definitely like to see more people just enlist in these activities, because they get their energy out, their mind gets tired, and it's not about any form of satisfaction of hitting somebody else. Then we're going into mentality and psychology, basically, if you have that urge to hit somebody else. But it becomes more about anger and anger management and getting that energy that you have stored up inside of you out in some way or another, whether that be running or boxing into a boxing bag or something that you feel gives you that results. But again, just remember that you're going into two different roles here. Inside of the ring, inside of the dojo, where you're duking it out, you're not the same person anymore. You're there to win against an opponent on a professional level. So do keep that in mind. That was my little talk about anger, inspired by an event that happened on a tennis court. So not too bad. And also what is not too bad is I'm heading way back home now. Another working day, things to do, things to be settled from the weekend activities. So talk to you tomorrow again. Bye bye.